In a desolate wasteland, Rick gets launched several feet across the floor during a fight, and he is seriously worried that he may die. Just then, his mentors emerge from the smoke, and rather than administer some first aid, they praise him for improving so much over the past 2 years of training, so he should have no problem with the E-rank adventurer exams now. And the praise is nice, but he still needs medical attention. Normally, the adventurers in this world are all young people due to all the strain that it would put on a person's body, but there are still some adults who never give up on their dreams, and that's why Rick is still trying to take the entrance exam. He walks up to the reception desk and asks for his exam ticket to be issued. But while the receptionist is confirming his details, she happens to recognize Rick and excitedly reminds him that used to know each other. Rick doesn't recognize her at first, but he soon recalls that he last saw her 2 years ago. They used to be co-workers, and she was really shocked when Rick resigned from his position out of nowhere, but even more so when she heard that he quit his job to become an adventurer. Rick is a little embarrassed since people in their 30s like him usually wouldn't apply to become adventurers. Normally, you'd start at G rank in your teens and work your way up to E within a year or two. The receptionist asks what Rick has been up to these past 2 years since she hadn't heard from him at all. So Rick explains that he was pretty much cooped up in the mountains the entire time so that he could train with his mentors. Just then, the guild's usual drunkard walks up to the front desk and starts trying to flirt with the receptionist. But when she tries to decline because she is still obviously working, the guy doesn't take no for an answer, so he starts getting a little rough with the receptionist. And that's when Rick decides to step in, so he pulls the guy aside and lightly tabs his stomach with enough force to knock him out instantly. The receptionist apologizes for the inconvenience the drunk guy caused him, but Rick says it's fine since he used to work as a receptionist as well, and he still doesn't understand why the guild thinks it is a good idea to serve alcohol in here. After Rick receives his exam number, he heads outside where a maid named Renette greets him. She asks if Rick is done with his registration, and Rick confirms as much, thanking her for waiting for him. And while he says this, he is intently staring at Renette's huge jiggly puffs. She calls him out on this, so Rick tries to change the subject and talk about how excited he is for the exam. Back inside, the other adventurers are in shock at the handprint that was left on the drunk guy's armor, and that armor was made of dense steel, so whoever did this must be seriously strong. Just then, 2 guys walk in and recognize the drunk guy from a mugshot they saw a while back. His name is Domold, and he is an A-rank adventurer who's wanted for 30 counts of assault. The receptionist knows that Rick is the one who did this, but if he was really able to take out an A-rank adventurer, then he may be overqualified. In the meantime, Rick is getting a physical exam done, and its height is measured to be about 5'8", but the physician are surprised Rick is taking this test when he's already 32 years old. After that, all the examinees are led to the next room where they are instructed to place their hands on the crystal ball to measure their mana. It will glow depending on the level of mana a person possesses, so the others touch it, they get varying results with the highest being a C, but when it's Rick's turn, the orb barely lights up at all, so the examiner gives Rick an F on his mana exam. The other candidates begin mocking Rick for having such a low mana score as he leaves, but once the examiner calls for the next candidate to step up, the orb spontaneously shatters. The next test is one to measure the candidate's offensive abilities, so they are instructed to strike the green rod as hard as they can. It is a special slime bag that can absorb a lot of impacts, so they don't need to worry about damaging it. Rick remembers training with a slime bag once, and at the time, one of his mentors told him that he had to be able to destroy a golden slime bag with nothing but his fists. Rick didn't think that was possible since a golden slime bag is as hard as a dragon's fang, but his mentor told him that it was the least he had to do if he wanted to become an adventurer, and since his mentor was able to effortlessly destroy one with a single punch, Rick became motivated to train until it broke, even if he had to punch it 50,000 times a day. He hid in that training, but back to the present, the candidates begin lining up in to strike the bag with all their might, and after the first guy has kicked it, the next candidate called up is the second son of the Dermute family, and it is rumored that his magic is as strong as a C-rank adventurer's despite only being 11 years old. As the boy begins, he casts a Hellflame spell, and everyone is surprised, including Rick. Although he's surprised because the spell is so tiny, the fireball is launched and hits the target, and the judges are actually impressed by the kid's output, so Rick is even more shocked since the fireballs his magic teacher would throw at him were far more deadly than what that kid just used. Naturally, Rick assumes the kid's fireball must have been just as powerful as his teacher's fireball, but maybe the kid shrunk it down so that it wouldn't destroy the building. As the attack power exam goes on, it eventually gets to Rick's turn, but as he is walking up to the slime bag, the examiner calls his attention and asks if he is really over 30 years old. Rick answers yes, so the examiner tells him that he is too old to be doing stuff like this. Training usually doesn't yield much of a result unless it is started very early on in life, and with how bad his mana exam score was, he should just quit before he makes a fool of himself. Rick knows people are judging him for being too old, and he really feels like giving up, but he has worked too hard to get to this point, punching slime bags until his knuckles were red with blood, and he still kept punching. All that pain has to count for something, so even if he is at a disadvantage for being old, he's going to give this everything he's got. Rick winds up his punch, and as he makes contact with the bag, it splatters everywhere and goes flying through the wall, leaving everyone shocked, including Rick's, since he wasn't expecting the bag to be so weak. The kid can't believe what he just witnessed, and he is frustrated by Rick's success, since this was supposed to be his stage to shine on, but he can accept losing to Rick for now since his specialty is really defensive magic, so he will make sure to outperform Rick on the next test. However, by the time they start the next test, the kid is left speechless as Rick has just tanked a 4th nature spell with ease. The examiner compliments Rick on being skilled enough to block his attacks, and Rick appreciates it, since he is doing his best. The instructor doesn't think Rick is actually giving it his all since he has just been using a first nature spell to defend himself so far, so he advises Rick to use a higher tier of defensive magic from now on. However, Rick informs him that he doesn't actually know how to use any other spells aside from first order ones, so he really is doing the best he can. The examiner can't believe Rick is actually only capable of using first order spells since he has such precise control over his mana, but Rick assures him that there won't be any problems since, from what he has seen so far, his first order spells should be more than enough to handle anything the examiner can throw at him. The examiner takes that as a personal insult, so he prepares to use a 5th order spell to show Rick that he shouldn't take someone like him lightly. As he casts the spell and unleashes a shock cyclone, a massive shockwave echoes through the kingdom, so far that even a knight on the other side of town could hear it. A few minutes later, Sylvester arrives at the exam center to figure out what's going on over here. He is informed that an F-rank adventurer managed to completely destroy a slime bag with his bare hands and perfectly block a 5th nature spell while only using basic defense magic. Sylvester thinks she must be playing a prank on him or something, but she is dead serious about everything she just told him. Right now, Rick is busy taking the written part of this exam, and he looks like he's confident in his knowledge for this one. After the test is over, Rick takes a break with Reinette, and she asks him how the written test went. Rick confidently answers that he is sure he will get 100% on the written test. After all, he spent 14 years working as a receptionist for the guild, so there's no way he could fail. However, he's still not sure his overall scores will be good enough to pass the exam. Reinette asks if Rick is worried about his practical exam scores, but he thinks he did pretty well in all the categories. However, he still got an F on his mana exam, so he's not sure how that will affect his chances of passing. Reinette assures Rick that he should be fine after all the training he did to prepare for this exam, but moments later, the kid from earlier comes up to Rick and screams at him for doing too well on the tests. Rick doesn't know what this is about, so he assumes Freed must have gotten lost or something, so he offers to help him. Freed is upset because this was supposed to be the day he showed off his exceptional skills to all the peasants, but Rick went and outperformed him, so he's crying about it now. Rick tries to tell Freed that he didn't intend to steal his spotlight, but Freed's sister has already arrived, and after seeing her little brother crying, she immediately starts yelling at Rick. Rick asks if she is related to Freed by any chance, so she introduces herself as Angelica Diremute, and Freed wastes no time in telling her that this 40-year-old man ruined his day. Rick is offended and says he is only 30, but Angelica and Freed keep calling him a 40-year-old man. Eventually, Angelica throws her glove at Rick to challenge him to a duel, and Rick doesn't realize that it's a challenge, so he picks up the glove because he doesn't want it to get stained. Unfortunately, as per noble customs, picking up that glove is a declaration of intent to throw hands, so Angelica happily sets a venue for them to begin the fight. She says she is going to take great pleasure in punishing Rick for the crime of making her brother cry, but if they are going to do this, then they have to play by the rules. Duels in the Fylheim Kingdom allows the winner to set a penalty for the loser if they win, so she sets a penalty stating that the loser will have to serve the winner for the rest of their life. Angelica is apparently a second-class royal knight, but Rick doesn't know how strong a second-class knight is supposed to be, so Reinette gives him some context and explains that a second-class knight would be around B rank. Rick starts freaking out because he knows B-rank adventurers are able to take out huge monsters on their own, but Reinette doesn't think it's a big deal and asks Rick to hold back so he doesn't end up killing her. Rick can't imagine holding back against someone at B-rank while he is still F-rank since he still has no context for how strong he truly is, so Reinette tells him to just have faith in all the training he has done for the last 2 years. All of a sudden, all the traumatic training montages he had to go through come flooding into his mind, so he ends up throwing up. Rick curses Reinette for making him relive such torture. But she reminds him that if he was able to survive all that, then he shouldn't have a problem handling Angelica. After all, he's a member of the strongest party on the continent, so he should have a little more faith in himself. Rick realizes that she's right, so he gets up to face Angelica with no fear. He is still not sure how well his current level of strength will hold up against a second-class knight, but there's no use worrying about it now. Angelica is confident that she is much stronger than Rick, so she promises to hold back against him so that he doesn't die, and then begins charging up her attack. She then uses Blink Step to dash past Rick, just to show him how fast she is. Her speed has earned her the title of Lightspeed Angelica, and Rick is definitely surprised, but not for the reason she thinks. Angelica says she will now finish him off with her next attack, so she uses Blink Step again. But as she's approaching Rick, he can't believe what he's seeing because Angelica is moving so slow. The power scales must have been high on copium if they thought she was worthy of the Lightspeed title, because she is moving slower than his normal running speed. Rick easily dodges her strike, and Angelica can't believe it since it should be impossible for an F-rank adventurer to keep up with her speed. In fact, only first-class knights have ever managed to react to her speed, so she rationalizes it by saying Rick just got lucky, but she won't let it happen again. She uses Blink Step once more, but in Rick's eyes, she is still moving really slow, so he wonders how she could have possibly made it to B rank like this. He is starting to realize that he may actually be pretty strong, but just as he is getting ready to dodge Angelica's attack, she trips on a rock and briefly unlocks the vertical B-blade attack. Rick can't predict any of the strikes, so he is having trouble dodging, and by the time Angelica finally stops herself, he no longer thinks he can call himself strong because he was completely unprepared for that attack. However, neither was Angelica because she didn't plan any of that. She tries to play it cool and tells Rick she's impressed that he managed to dodge her last attack because she totally meant to do that, but that just means she will have to go even faster to overwhelm him. She uses her special technique, which allows her to move 3 times faster than normal. But even though she is 3 times faster, she is still pretty slow to Rick. However, he chooses not to attack carelessly since he doesn't know what kind of tricks she might have up her sleeve, so he dodges instead, and Angelica is left flabbergasted that Rick can still keep up with her. She can only use that technique 2 more times before she runs out of energy, so she gives it everything she has and goes for one last desperate attack. However, she trips once more, so Rick tries to intercept her with a punch and ends up blowing a hole in the ground. Angelica realizes that she would have died from a punch like that if it had connected, so she is terrified of Rick and questions who he really is. Rick just says he is a former receptionist turned adventurer. He is eager to continue his fight with Angelica, so he climbs out of the hole to face her again, but Angelica immediately surrenders so she doesn't end up getting killed. Rick doesn't understand why she is giving up, but her surrendering makes him the winner, and as per the penalty Angelica set, she now has to serve him for the rest of her life. Angelica had forgotten all about that penalty, so she does the only thing she can think to do and runs away. Rick doesn't really care about the bet, so he doesn't chase after her, and the results of the exam will be coming out soon, so he needs to go back to check if he passed. This is when Renette tells Rick that the rest of his mentors will be coming to check on him, and Rick starts freaking out because their presence always spells trouble. Rick and Renette head back to the exam center for now, and they are told that the results will soon be announced through their exam tickets. If you pass, your ticket will glow blue and you will be allowed to move on to the second stage of the exams, but anything else would mean the candidate has failed. Rick is really worried that he might have failed the exam, so Renette tries to reassure him that he did well on the exam. Rick thinks Renette is nice for trying to make him feel better, and if he were 10 years younger, he would totally marry her. But she also has her scary side as she threatens to triple his training if he somehow managed to fail. Just then, Rick's card begins to glow, so he picks it up in anticipation, and he is elated to discover that he has successfully passed the first exam. He leaves the hall with Renette, but as he steps outside, a dreadful stench fills his nostrils. He looks over and sees this rich dude walking straight up to Renette, and he immediately introduces himself as the eldest son of the Diremute family, Raster Diremute. Rick has had to deal with 2 Diremute family members already, but this time Raster isn't here for Rick, he's here to shoot his shot with Renette. Rick tries to introduce himself to Raster, but Raster wants nothing to do with a muscular middle-aged man, so he goes back to talking to Renette and tells her that he is deeply in love with her jugs. Sorry, he meant to say personality and wants Renette to come with him so that she can become his second wife. This is where Rick draws the line since he can't lose Renette to someone like Raster, so he steps in front of Renette and says she is his girlfriend, so Raster has no right to shoot his shot anymore. Raster looks down and notices that Rick is holding an exam card, which means he must still be F rank, and he finds it hilarious that someone as old as Rick is still at the lowest rank. Rick tries to defend himself by saying Raster is a little too old to be taking the exam as well since he looks like he's at least 25, but Raster just laughs and tells Rick that he isn't here as an examinee. He already passed this test back when he was 14, so he's actually an A-rank adventurer, and he is here as an instructor for the second part of the exam. Believing he has asserted dominance over Rick, Raster turns back to Rionette and asks her if she would like to join him for dinner, but Rionette shuts him down and says the only man she'll go with is Rick, especially with the ungodly amount of perfume Raster sprayed on himself. Raster is enraged and can't accept that he won't be getting Rionette to go with him, so he swears that if he ends up in charge of Rick's exam, that he will make sure Rick suffers as much as possible. And that definitely going to make Rionette love him instead totally. After Raster walks off, Rick prays that he doesn't have to deal with him during the exam, but then he notices that Rionette is still clinging on to him, so he jumps back in embarrassment. He apologizes to Rionette for calling her his girlfriend all of a sudden, but Rionette says he doesn't need to be sorry about it since he did it to get rid of Raster, and it made her really happy. Meanwhile, Raster's stewing in rage because he couldn't get Rionette to be his second wife, and he lost her to a middle-aged man at that. Just then, his two siblings come running up to him and Fried says an old man was messing with him during the exam, while Angelica complains that the same old man beat her in a duel and wanted to make her his servant, even though she is the one who made the bet to begin with. The way they say it makes it sound like they didn't do anything wrong, so Raster is outraged that someone would dare to humiliate his family like this, but when he learns that the one who did this is Rick, he gets a wicked grin on his face because he now has an excuse to get payback. A while later, the mock battles are about to begin, and Rick is really nervous about it. Rionette asks him to make sure he holds back during the exam, but Rick still believes he is weak, so he doesn't understand why he would have to hold back against people who should be stronger than him. And he still has to worry about Raster since it would be terrible if he was the one in charge of his test. Just then, Rick and Rionette bump into a man named Lynx, and he says he will be the one in charge of Rick's exam, and Rick instantly begins celebrating because that's one more thing he doesn't have to worry about. Lynx goes on to say that he is surprised that Rick would want to switch jobs to an adventurer at his age, but it's not like he is saying it's a bad thing. In fact, he believes it is inspiring that Rick still has the determination to work toward his dreams, and he can relate since they are similar in age. Lynx became an adventurer back when he was 24, but in the 20 years since then, he has only been able to achieve B rank. But if he wants to accomplish his goals, he would need to get to A rank. Seeing Rick work so hard has motivated him to do his best as well, and he is excited to test Rick in the upcoming mock battle, but he won't be going easy on him. However, around the corner, we see Raster lurking with devious activity on his mind. As Rick and Lynx part ways, Lynx walks down the dark stairwell, and out of nowhere, Raster shows up behind him with a proposal which doubles as a threat. At the same time, Rick and Rionette are waiting in the locker room, and Rick seems to be in a much better mood than he was earlier, and it's all because he got Lynx as his instructor. However, a moment later, someone comes in to announce that Lynx has mysteriously fallen ill, so he won't be able to act as an instructor anymore. In his place, Raster has been assigned to take over Rick's exam, and Rick starts freaking out. Rionette mentions that Raster must have pulled some illegal strings to get this to happen, and since he is related to Angelica and Fried, he may be holding a grudge against Rick. The other examinees in the room begin talking about how terrible it is to have Raster as your instructor for the exam, and while he may be a dignified member of the Diarmuid family, he is also known for how much he enjoys beating up F-rank adventurers. Every single year, he picks a particular adventurer to mess with and does everything in his power to make them fail, which is bad news for Rick since Raster definitely hates his guts right now. Later, as Raster is outside tormenting a random examinee, he fires a barrage of ice blasts and knocks the guy out. But just as he was insulting the examinee for being weak, his fun gets interrupted as he receives a message from the elite guard. Meanwhile, Rick is pacing around inside as it is soon going to be his turn and he doesn't know how he is going to handle Raster. Rionette doesn't understand what Rick is so worried about since he just needs to beat Raster. However, Rick thinks beating Raster is impossible since he is a respected A-rank adventurer, while Rick is only F-rank. He believes he will die if he faces Raster, but if he backs out, he will have to do 3 times his normal training. Rionette gets in front of Rick and asks him if he really isn't confident in his skills. He sincerely believes that he is an inadequate adventurer since he switched to this job too late in life and everyone always tells him that he is too old to do it. But Rionette tells him that he shouldn't let what other people think shake his confidence because all that matters is that she believes in him. Even if Rick can't believe in himself, she wants him to trust her judgment when she says he can win. Rick thanks her for her kind words and says he is feeling much more confident now. Just then, a cloaked boy approaches Rick and offers him a free fortune-telling. He explicitly says there's nothing shady going on here, so despite this whole thing being really suspicious, Rick decides to go along with it. However, just as Rick is about to sit down, Rionette notices a magic circle on the chair, so she tries to warn Rick that it's a trap, but she ends up being too late as Rick is teleported away in an instant. After that, the boy removes his cloak and reveals that he is actually freed, and he is quite pleased with himself for being able to trick Rick into falling for his trap. However, he should have thought of a plan to teleport himself away as well, since Reinette is severely pissed and blows a hole through the wall while holding him by the collar. She asks Freed where Rick has been teleported to, and Freed refuses to tell her initially. But after a non-consensual eyelash trim and the threat of some eye poking, Freed tells her that his teleportation magic can only send someone 100 meters away at most, so Rick is still nearby. Meanwhile, Rick has just appeared on the river behind the training center, and he is really confused about how he got here in the first place. Just then, the elite guard shows up and Rick is told that unfortunately, they have orders to beat him up. They are the elite guard of the Diarmid family, so Rick realizes that Raster and the others must be behind this. They don't want Raster to get his hands dirty, so they'll make it so that Rick won't be able to participate in the exam. Rick calls them shameless for trying to stall him so he misses his exam, but the leader corrects him and says this is a coordinated jumping. Among the elite guard, they have B and A rank adventurers, so Rick feels like he is utterly outmatched. As he is contemplating what to do, he notices some people standing on the ledge nearby, and upon taking a closer look, he realizes that they are the senior members of his party, and they scare him more than the elite guard. His party members jump down to ask Rick why he is here when he has an exam to get to, so fearing for the lives of the elite guard, he makes up a lie that they were just trying to help him get ready. Rostin offers to join them if they are doing training, but Rick knows how hellish training with Broston is, so he tries to warn the leader of the elite guard to get everyone to leave before they get themselves killed. The leader doesn't take him seriously and tells his team to kill Broston, but as one of them tries to slash Broston on the head, the sword shatters to pieces, and Broston is just standing there stone-faced. He commends the guy for strengthening his body well, but he is disappointed that he failed to strengthen his weapon enough so that it wouldn't break. The guy gets angry and decides to use his fists instead, but that goes about as well as you would expect since Broston just grabs his hand and squishes it until it turns purple. However, Broston tells him that he doesn't need to worry since he has healing magic to restore his mangled hand to normal. The leader of the elite guard is starting to realize that he might have screwed up by attacking these guys and finally seems to be grasping how powerful they truly are. While all this is going on, Mizette asks Rick if the elite guard are really here to pick a fight with him. Rick confirms it, so Mizette says he will handle it for him in a peaceful manner. He then proceeds to pull out his Super Fire Barrel Mk3 rifle and fires at all the people within range, leaving them limp on the ground. Rick yells at him for killing everyone when he said he would resolve this peacefully, but Mizette asserts that none of them are dead yet, probably. One guy tries to take Alice as a hostage to gain the upper hand, but he has no idea just how badly he just messed up. Even Broston tells him that he had better back away from her slowly if he doesn't want to die, but the guy doesn't listen and hits Alice to get her to shut up, and his fate was sealed once he did that because Alice proceeds to vaporize him. The other members of the elite guard can't believe what just happened, but the leader has figured out exactly what's going on, so he tells them that the vampire girl is a prodigy who is the world's strongest mage despite only being 10 years old. Alistair Drackle. Mizette is a dwarf who is so skilled that he can make technology no one has ever seen before, and Broston is an orc with incredible strength and wisdom. They are all S-rank adventurers, meaning they possess strength beyond common sense, and on top of that, they are part of a party which consists entirely of S-rank adventurers or Chalcom Fist. The leader never thought he would get to see such powerful people in person, so now that he has, he decides to do the smart thing and retire from the elite guard effective immediately. However, the rest of the guys who didn't quit ended up having to deal with Alice, so Rick just tries to ignore all the screams of pain and focus on his exam. Rick makes it back to Reinette after she has dealt with Freed, and they soon find Lynx, who has been badly beaten. Earlier, Raster cornered Lynx and asked him what his dream was, and when Lynx answered that he wanted to build a school for the kids back in his village, Raster said screw those kids and beat Lynx up for daring to have a dream. Raster did this so that he could get to Rick, and Rick is insanely pissed about it. So while he was scared before, he now has nothing but determination to beat Raster's ass. This was the end of episode 2. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to not miss the next part.